Good afternoon. It is wonderful to be together for lunch and learn. For this month, we have perhaps one of the most exciting speakers that we have had. Her name is Rachel Korazim, and I'll share with you her bio. But before I do that, I just want to share with you how incredible it is to have her with us. She has been to Temple Beth El Boca Raton in person, but it has been over the pandemic that Rachel's voice has been the one that has perhaps been in my head more than any others. Think back to last March and April that turned into July and August, and every day was different and changing. And the one constant in my life was an incredible poetry class that Rachel, who is the best teacher of Israeli poetry in all the world, I truly believe, was teaching out of Israel. And so in the darkness and ugliness of the pandemic, every day a light would shine through with her teaching Israeli poetry, bringing Israel alive and Jewish history alive. And I know not just for me, but the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that have joined her, was sometimes daily, sometimes biweekly, depended on the week. I know she got a lot of us through the beginnings of that pandemic with her incredible teaching. And so it is truly a blessing to have her with us for this month now, teaching Natan Alterman, because she will talk about a little bit about Rachel. She is a Jewish education consultant in curriculum development for Israel and Holocaust education. She opens for her audiences a window to Israeli society through literature. She has created a global community since COVID-19 with hundreds of learners who meet regularly to study Israeli poetry, and still including several of our members who I see there, Madeline Siegel, who has helped sponsor Rachel being with us this month. And the Feldmans have been part of that. And also the Kalmansons and the Levs and others who've watched you now, you get to be with us here. Born in Israel, she served as an IDF officer training women and later was a member of the IDF delegation to Niger, West Africa, graduated from Haifa University with a PhD in Jewish education. She's lived around the world as a Jewish educator, as an emissary for the land of Israel, and her life truly combines the Holocaust and Israel, and she just makes it all come alive. And so, Rachel, we are thrilled to welcome you with us for the month. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for this wonderful, wonderful introduction. And now all I need to do is live up to this, right? Which is no challenge at all. I'm also always so concerned when I get these fabulous introductions, because how do I know that I make it true? But I will try. So welcome, everybody. Wonderful to see you. Some names I know, some are new, and it is great to have all of you. So let me start by putting on my slide, and we will start right ahead with where we are going. You can see, and I try really to put on my slides that which is most important. So poetry and history, or the unique case of Natan Alterman. I know that many of you would prefer to call him Nathan Alterman, and that is fine by me, but I prefer to pronounce it the Hebrew Israeli way, Natan Alterman, just like I prefer to be called Rachel and not Rachel. And indeed, there is a unique case of this particular poet, and it will be my task today and in the upcoming 3 other meetings to show you how unique that case is. We have planned together with the rabbi to try and deal with 4 topics through the perspective of 4, 1 in each session, poems that I will introduce separately, but you can see the topics as they are coming. So today we deal with a very important poem written by Alterman at the time of the clandestine immigration to the land of Israel. So that would mean during the British Mandate, mainly after World War II, when survivors of the Holocaust are trying to break through the British blockade and make it to the land of Israel. In our second session next week, we will focus on a very particular poem again, probably the one best known of the writings of Alterman, the Silver Platter, that deals with the War of Independence. a painful session. Number 3 will deal with the issue of war ethics. More about that when we get to that session. And the beautiful one to me that speaks to the idea of freedom of speech as one of the traits of a democracy as young as it has been. Let me draw your attention to the right-hand side of my slide, where I need for you to look first at the top, where you have actually an illustration of Natan Alterman. You will see photographies of him later. And I want you to note the years, 1910 to 1970, which immediately will tell you, A, more than 50 years that he is gone and still extremely important. B, he wasn't fortunate enough to live a very long life. He did not make his 60th birthday. So these are the two things that I want for you to carry with you as we continue. A poet that could have stayed with us longer, a poet that is many years gone and still very much in the Israeli public sphere. The other thing I need for you to look at is at the bottom right-hand side of my slide. And this is a little bit of bragging, but I don't care. I brag occasionally. So this is a picture I have taken. It is from my own bookshelf. And this is not my Natan Alterman bookshelf. I have 3 of those. This is just the bookshelf dedicated to a segment of Alterman's writing called the 7th column, Hatur Hashvi'i, and reference literature around it. So this already gives you an idea of how prolific this writer had been, and that we are focusing, mind you, I call it a segment, and you can see 6 thick volumes of that little segment out of the larger work of Natan Alterman. So the other thing that I need for you to carry in your hearts as we go into the session, that we are barely touching the surface, that this is a writer that had left behind a tremendous body of literature, and we are going to skim and cherry pick here and there so we get an idea of what he gave us or what we inherited from his work. A little bit of biography, not so much, but the things that are relevant. So family picture from when he is what, like 10 years old, one are gonna say, maybe 12 years old. And I like you to look at the way these people are dressed, because you remember when he was born, 1910. So this is probably 1920, just as World War I ended. And you can see that, but for the grandmother in smack middle of the picture, who is dressed traditionally, head covered, the rest of the family is not dressed traditionally. We do not see the mother covering her hair. We are not sure. Maybe the father has a kippah, maybe he does not, probably not. So this is a family that goes into what we used to call, towards the end of the 19th century, the Enlightenment, the general education, Zionism included. So father is a Hebrew teacher and the creator of Jewish education frameworks, Zionist, mind you. Mother, you will never guess, I'll have to tell you, a dentist, a real doctor, dentist at that time. Like, wow, how many like that? Which tells you immediately that Alterman and his sister are raised by the grandmother, because the parents are people of career even at that early stage of our history. So born in Warsaw in 1910, and I'm going to do very fast clicks to show you a phenomenon. Alterman is born in 1910 in Warsaw, and the family arrives to Tel Aviv in 1925. And in between, more or less, they are really wandering Jews. So Moscow, Kiev, Kishinev, not at the time of the pogrom. Alterman was born 7 years after the Kishinev pogrom. But major Jewish centers prior to the Holocaust, where the father is busy creating Zionist, advanced, modern, non-Cheder-like frameworks of Jewish education. By 1925, this Zionistically committed family will make it to British Mandate Tel Aviv, to a Tel Aviv, a thriving city, where Alterman, still young, 15, will graduate in Gimnasia Herzliya. The building does not exist anymore. The school is still around and extremely successful. So this is a quick history. And now let's take the same story, like put Alterman in a certain framework or timeline, if you wish. What is the poetic context? Don't feel awkward now if you know none of the names. I'm doing this with the hope that you might know some of them or maybe look them up. So the Alterman poetic group, if you wish, comes immediately in the wake of the great lights of Bialik and Chernychovsky. These are Hebrew poets who have started their career in places like Odessa or other places of the Ukraine, and they will make Aliyah later in life. Alterman already belongs to the poets whose main career is not the state of Israel, but already the land of Israel. So I'm going very quickly to use some expressions in Hebrew and translate immediately. You would address or speak about Bialik and Chernychovsky as Mishorerim poets, Ivriyim, Hebrew poets, and you will address Alterman and the people of his generation. I'm just giving you two, Alexander Penn and Avram Shlonsky, but I could put Leah Goldberg there and others. You will call them Mishorerim Eretz Yisraeliyim, poets of the land of Israel, and the generation after that, who will be already names known to you, such as Amichai and Amos Oz, etc. These will be Sofrim, writers, Meshorerim, Yisraelim of the state of Israel. So Alterman belongs to this group somewhere smack in the middle, not yet the state of Israel, but already the land of Israel. Professionally, let us highlight a few elements of who he is in that huge body of literature. First of all, he has a daytime job. I mean, I'm sort of tongue-in-cheek because his daytime job is being a night editor of a major daily paper of the time. That is the paper of the labor movement. So Ben-Gurion is the head of the labor movement in those years. So if you want, you could say that he works for Ben-Gurion. He is the night editor of the most important daily paper of the time. And you know that in those years, for lack of social networks, internet and such, the daily paper was how you got your information. He's a national poet. And I tried to pick a picture where you can see him standing on a terrace and looking at you or looking from above by looking at the plethora of themes and topics that interest us. Then I wanted to get a closer picture to suggest that there is a huge body of his lyrical poetry, which we are not even touching today, and to remember, unlike what many people, Jewish people mainly, living outside of Israel, when you say an Israeli writer or you say an Israeli poet, you immediately tend to think that person is from Jerusalem. Well, think again, because Alterman is a very much Tel Aviv person and not a Jerusalem person. And you will have to work very hard. I did to find Yerushalayim even mentioned in his poetry. So I could share with you a little bit of that. He is very much a Tel Aviv poet. And now we are going to the topic of our first poem today, which deals with the issue of the clandestine immigration. So let me place you in time. We are in that narrow straits, if you wish, between the end of World War II and the enormity of the Holocaust and losses and tragedies of that becoming known. 1945, May, if you wish, we are just practically living those days, the liberation, the end of World War II coming up this week in May of 1945. And in May, 3 years later of 1948, the birth of the state of Israel, Ben-Gurion declaring the state. both things happening in May. We're looking at a period of time of 3 years, and this is our focus. It's the British mandate, and because of the relationship of Britain with the Arabs of the region, with the Arab population of the land of Israel, Palestinian one would call it today, they are enforcing limitations on the number of immigrants that can enter the land. Therefore, the Haganah, one of the clandestine immigrations, as well as the others, the Etzel, the Irgun, is involved in clandestine immigration as well. The Lehi, the Stern Gang, not so much. But we are looking at the Haganah boat, the original name of which was the Smyrna, and once the Haganah takes it over to bring clandestine immigrations, people who do not have the permits from the Brits to come. 2/3 of those boats were caught by the Brits and first incarcerated in the land of Israel, after that sent to Cyprus. Why did I call this slide Clandestine Immigration and I? Because I invite you to look, first of all, at the name of this particular boat that lands in Haifa on May 14th, 1946. And in our family, we mark that day. And why is that? Because the young lady here leaning out, trying to catch a glimpse of the Haifa coast is my mom of blessed memory. And if you had really X-ray eyes, you could see me, because upon arrival, mom is pregnant with me, and I will be born as Sabra in the land of Israel in October of that very same year. So now you know exactly how old I am, and you know that this particular poem I have a very close connection to, and I much rather be, transparent about those things and share with you that bit of information. I actually love this picture, and it's very rare. I mean, it's not relatives who took the picture. It so happened that when the picture was taken from the Haifa port as the boat was approaching, somebody took a picture, and mom, who was always curious, was there to look out at the coast, at the port. So we cherish it. We discovered it many years later, but mom was still alive when we did. Okay, so we are looking at the Alterman poem. We know that he has these two aspects to his career. He is a night editor, but he has a permanent column in that Davar daily, of which he is the night editor. That column appears every Friday, and in it, Alterman deals with contemporary events. So we have a crossroad point between an absolutely amazingly talented poet, but also the eye of a journalist. And he combines the two, because by 1946, his seventh column is very well known, and his poetry is very well known. So you will see in the next slide that he is actually, I'll show it to you just so that the date of the arrival of this boat is December 25, 1945. And since it has two slides, I want you to see how Alterman is literally on the spot, like a good journalist. He is invited by the commanders who want to go out there to the beach and try and smuggle in the immigrants to witness it. So the event is not my mom's boat. The event comes about 5 months before my mom makes her aliyah. And this is December of 1945, so barely a few months after the end of World War II. The boat is arriving. My mom's boat was the Max Nordau, and this particular boat is named after Hannah Senesh, the famous parachutist that volunteered to be sent into Nazi-conquered Hungary to try and help our brethren there. Unfortunately, her mission failed. So Alterman, in his poem, the title of which is extremely interesting to me, it's called Ne'um Tshuva L'Rav Chavrim Italki Acharei Leil Horada. And you can see that the English title is shorter. So indeed, the translator opted to shorten it. A response to an Italian captain, which is about half of the Hebrew title. The other half says, after a night of downloading the immigrants, Leil Horada, the night of downloading. Did that event happen? Was Alterman indeed present after the successful downloading of a group of immigrants from a given boat in some sort of a dinner or another meal where they were, drinking in honor of the Italian captain who was hired to lead this boat in the land? Does he imagine such a scene? Actually, by now we can be sure, because one of those many reference books about the seven column that I showed you on my shelf actually goes to the very famous seventh column poems and researches its background. And the writer of that one, Mordechai Naor, I will be quoting him oftentimes, says that indeed such a dinner happened in Kibbutz Yagur, and Alterman was seeing, the people toasting the captain, etc. What I would like to do is to read a little bit of the Ivrit, of the Hebrew, so just a little bit of the experience, of listening to the language, to the original. Then we will go into the translation, which has two major qualities. A, it's beautiful, and B, it's not exactly true to the original. So here and there where there are discrepancies, I will show them to you, and let you be the judge whether it was worthwhile to go for the beauty of the translation and let go of some of the ultimate subtleties that are lost. So let us start and go into it. עננים על ראשנו, הרוח איתן, המלאכה נעשתה, חי שמיים. נרים כוס קפיטן של ברכה קפיטן, עוד נשוב ניפגש על המים. The wind lashed the sea and the sea lashed the ship. The task was completed, holy Moses. We drink to you, Captain, and lift the glass high. We'll meet again on these waters. So first of all, you can immediately see that this is not the tone of a, very poetic, not even journalistic. I would say Alterman adopts here the tone and the structure of the ballad that tells of heroic aspects, that tells of great deeds or of death and life, etc., and celebration and drinking here and there. This is absolutely the ballad format. And you may wonder after the first stanza, Rachel, come on, seriously? What are all these clouds and lashing winds? This is the Mediterranean. This is Israel. The sea is not that terrible. Well, the answer is, of course, in the date. This is literally Christmas Day. It's in the middle of winter. So Alterman is justified to talk about the stormy sea and the lashing winds. אלמונית קפיטן היא הדרך הזאת, ובלוידים אינה מפורסמת. No Lloyds would insure your small secret craft, nor the perilous struggle it wages. But though in the ship log no record be kept, we'll chart it in history pages. This is one of the verses that keeps exactly to the Alterman tone and yet creates a beautiful English verse. So I salute the translator, Mary Serkin, who passed away some 20 or so years ago, comes from an American Zionist family. So we note another thing here, that much like in many ballads, there is a clear addressee. The poet narrator voice is talking to the captain, not to us, but to the captain. This is a toast to the captain. And since the title said a response to the Italian captain, it could be that they allowed the captain to toast first. And after that, This other voice, the poetic voice, is responding. This frail hidden fleet, gray and silent of song and story, and many a captain who hears of the tale will envy you, captain, your glory. So we are now talking about a different aspect. A hero like the captain who led the boat through the treacherous sea, overcrowded to the top really, deserves, to be known, deserves to be written about. And this verse comes as a consolation. Maybe it's not very well known, right? Because this is a clandestine. But captain, honestly, the day will come that other captains will envy you, because there will be in the future, says the Hebrew, not the English, many poems and even novels telling this story. We come now to a verse where the translation is really not exact. So I'd like to show you two important differences. Let's go to the English first. The night hid the battle with wave and with tide, but our lads than the storm wind were stronger. O captain, you saw how from ship to the shore it swam with the refugee on his shoulder. Beautiful, isn't it? Beautiful rhyme in English, only I have an issue. So let's go to the Ivrit. Et amal bachorenu sodlel ya'atof. The first line does not speak of battle, but rather of the secrecy of the night covering the hard work and labor of our lads. And then where she says, but our lads, then the storm wind were stronger, oy vey. Alterman is so much more Jewish in his second line. Those of you who can read the second of this verse, Ach alav nevarech ke'alechem. We will say the blessing over the secret labor, just like we say hamotzi. We will bless it as we bless bread, like the basic of life. The other difference that hurts me comes in the fourth line, where the idea is kept, yet there is a small detail missing. O captain, you saw how from ship to the shore, each swam with a refugee on his shoulder. And the Hebrew, just the last line, Hem nosim et amam alei shechem. Same idea. They carry the new immigrants, the Palmachniks. But the English says one refugee. And Alterman's Hebrews say they carry their people. We look at the collective effort. It's not just one refugee each one of our Palmachniks is carrying. They together are carrying the people. Let's continue. A toast to the darkness that swooped on the sheep and crutched on the long lights that thought her. Oh, captain, good speed to the small wooden boats, good speed to those ships on the water. So you can see what eventually happened to this particular sea in the picture. I have no issue with this stanza. It's beautiful translated. We are within the toast. We can hear everybody filling their glasses, maybe clicking them, and we go to the next page. This is indeed that early morning dawn when the immigrants of the Chanasenish were downloaded from the boat, carried on the shoulders when help was needed to the shore, and Alterman just finding himself a small corner, sitting down on the coast and making his notes. Like, you don't have many such occasions when the eye of a photographer, probably one of the Palmach lads, knows that this is a historic moment when a well-known poets have joined the national effort and he's taking notes. Who knows what will transpire of what he is doing? We know now. What happens now is that what the Hebrew takes two verses for, the English sort of does a concise translation into one. So let me read the two Hebrew ones for you. We'll look at the English and see what is missing. ולחיי בחורים שקיבלו הפיקוד ובאופל כיוונו את השיט. למועד הנכון, למקום היעוד, בלי מצפן ומפה בליל ציד. גם בהם יסופר עוד סיפור מסוים, כי רואים גלי ים ורקיע, איך עומדים הם בקרב טרפלגר של העם, על ספינה בודדה שתבקיע. A toast to the lads that took up the fight and made it their people's Trafalgar. They turn each frail ship to a mailed man of war. The ship is of steel, it will conquer. Well, what can I tell you? Beautiful verse, very little to do with the original Hebrew. So now the poet, the narrator voice, is toasting not the captain, but the lads who do the job, who took over the command, and at night, without compass, without maps, at a hunting night, they managed to steer the boat where it needs to go. And the witnesses to this nation's Trafalgar battle are just heavens above and the waves of the sea. A little bit more elaborate in the Hebrew, but we still have the spirit in the English. And now comes a very Altermani trait, and let me take a minute to proceed with this by a slight introduction. I teach a lot of Alterman, and unfortunately, very little of his work is translated into English. So oftentimes I have to go through the motions of, with the help of people who have better English than mine, translate some of his poetry. When I do, especially the journalistic, but not only, by that I mean the seventh column, a poetry of Alterman, there are, how shall I call it, without overdoing it, without you telling me, yeah, you are really overboard, Rachel, with it. But there are prophetic elements in the Alterman poetry. And I did, and I will continue to show my listeners that. If you don't want to go all the way with this prophetic element, leave it at a lower level of extreme poet's sensitivity, the ability to sense what is coming. Years to come, look at the Hebrew third stanza, Yom Yavo. You'll slipping a glass of mulled wine or quaffling draught that is stronger, none like that in the Hebrew. Then you will smile, smoke up your pipe and shake your gray head and think of the days you were younger. More or less the Hebrew, a little bit more detailed, more graphic, the drink, the chewing of tobacco, the spitting, and then saying, yeah, I'm aging. You'll remember past deeds and say to your friends, I've seen much, but Santa Maria, I will never forget the night of the chase when we sped towards Naharia. Why did I sort of introduce these lines with a few words about the prophetic? Because Alterman, and you see him, he's sitting there taking notes, right? And how can he see already so far into the future? Whether the courage and the need to tell his readership, you know, the people who comes Friday morning will go pick up the paper and say, I wonder what Alterman is writing about this week. And he can give them in the year 1945, months after the Holocaust, way before the state is born. He's telling them normalcy will come. You will see. It is as if he's telling it to the captain. But let us think again, is the captain the true audience? Or is it the people, mainstream Jewish population of the land of Israel at the time, who read Devar? Those who are devastated by the news from Europe, but no news from the families that were destroyed. who are fighting and who know that there will be a terrible battle yet to fight against the Brits and then against the Arabs. And Alterman is able to sort of throw them into the future and tell them, as we say in Hebrew, everything will be fine. We will yet reach days of normalcy. This captain, very, very, very strong guy that you see right now, he'll be aged and he will think back of this and it will sound like a legend. And then now we come to a stanza that I like to highlight for the same reason. I'm doing the עברית first. ונספר לך אז כי פתוחים השערים, כבר מזמן נפתחו חי שמיים, ופתחה אותם זו חבורת הנערים, שעמדה אותו לילה במים. Then we will tell you, the gates of the land are open. They are open for quite some time now, thank God. Opened by the lads who clambered abroad and carried ashore their precious load. This is where I want to stop for a minute because hindsight, we are in the year 2021. Israel is 73. But these lines are written in 45. How does he know that it will all transpire? Where does the courage of belief come from? It will be over. The gates will be open. We will have a state of our own. 3 years ahead of time, do you dare prophesize what we will experience 3 years from today? I wouldn't, and he does. Great poets have that quality, also maybe that responsibility to say, I can tell you, I see it coming. And in the way he sees how those barefoot lads in the water will open the gates, will make the state come into being, he is ready for the conclusion of how the captain, aged now in Italy, with his glass of wine, will react. Then you'll chuckle and whisper, so nothing availed, neither radar nor destroyers to block our way. You'll curse in Italian and finish your glass, and the light throughout the port will fade away. Very exact translation. That's how it will be. So facing the lashing wind, a toast to the danger and hard work of today. Oh, Captain, Godspeed to the small wooden boats, Godspeed to the ships making their way. We have done a full circle. We started with the now, December 1945. We dared have a glimpse into the future, and Alterman is concluding by bringing us back to the harsh realities of the day. More boats need to come. More courage is needed. Let me step out of this for a moment and check with you, Rabbi, if you could see in the chat maybe some questions that you would like me to address, a concern, an
So
insight.
I got kicked off a couple times, so I'm going to ask Kira, our producer.
I did not see any questions in
Okay,
the chat.
so I have a quick question. Would Alterman have been aware of Emma? Jay, you have to put it in the chat. Would Alterman been aware of Emma Lazarus, because that line reminds me a bit of her?
It's more in the translation than in the original. Alterman was a great reader of poetry. How much American poetry, I'm not sure. French for sure, because he studied agronomy in France. Russian for sure, he translated Russian poetry. But you know what? There are Shakespeare Alterman translations. So he could have been. I never checked into that, maybe, but bear in mind that the translator is American, and therefore that could influence that. And thank you for your question. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah, Yair, go ahead. But you will need no?
So you have time to take a verbal, go ahead then, Jay.
Yeah, thank you, since there's time. Kol hakavod, I had a big question that I'll table for another time, which you touched on about the challenges of translation. And I'm not sure I would be as kind to the translator as you've been. But the question about audience and who's the audience that you refer to towards the latter part of the poem, I think is really interesting, because I do think he's talking to two audiences, because in those two verses, first of all, Chaye Santa Maria, that's only relevant to this Italian captain. I mean,
Sure.
who would use that bitu, even that idiom? But then he said, "Unesaper,"
And we will tell.
And we will tell. So I think that really underscores the audience. The audience he's speaking to are his fellow,
His locals.
locals, but also in the future. So I think that's a really interesting point.
So thank you, Yair, for that. Aline, just a moment. Yair, I want to show you something, and everybody else, of course, it's not only you, so that you understand why I'm so generous and happy with the translation. Have you seen the picture at the beginning with the volumes and volumes only of the seventh column? So double that with the other Alterman poetry, which would be another 7 thick volumes like this. And all that is translated into English is this. So can you understand, Yair, how happy I am when I find any translation?
Well, you're well aware of Stanley Burnshaw and the debate about translation, whether it should be more faithful to the original poem and be a little bit more literal, or whether you should try to make another poem out of it.
I'm aware.
And it's an interesting decision. Yeah, because here she totally doesn't, and she totally loses the AB structure of the poem. So other things. So yeah.
Okay, let's leave it at that. Aline, I'll take a quick comment or question, and then I want to go back and show you a complementary aspect of Alterman. Go ahead, Aline.
First of all, hello, it's wonderful to see you again, even if it's via Zoom, and hear you. This might be very basic, but is it possible that you or we, the readers, are reading into his pre-thoughts of what's happening and what happens in the future, because we know what did happen in the future, and that if in fact different things occurred within the state of Israel 4 years later, 10 years later, or whatever, you could read that into it too if you were here 60 years later and reading this. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I'm sorry, I don't get it.
She's saying hindsight is 2020. Like it's easy to.
That I get. But I now I want to be extremely literal. He is writing in December 45. The state is 2.5 years ahead, and nobody can know what the UN will decide, nothing. And he promises his readership, it will be over. The gates will be open. We will make it happen. Gates open means no Brits, means independence. And I'm not reading anything beyond that. I'm questioning the courage of the poet/prophet who takes upon himself the responsibility to talk to his audience, not to the captain. Forget the captain. Who cares about the captain? His davar readers. It's hard now, but we will win. The gates will be open. They will be coming. Now let me show you another Alterman aspect, not less important to me, because Alterman has a level, I would say, of honesty. Because this is like, wow, how great we are, how courageous, how successful. They wanted to destroy us, and here we are against the Brits, against the radar, everything. We are rescuing our people. This group of lads, somebody will need to mute themselves. This group of lads in the water will make it happen. And this is very glorious. And we can dance hora and toast a glass of wine and think how great we are, not Alterman. So I want to show you a poem published a couple of months after the independence is declared, when these immigrants, Holocaust survivors, continue coming. And we should continue to celebrate ourselves that with the very limited means and fighting the war of independence at the time, we are making that come. And Alterman says, yes, but. One of the Gachal. Gachal is acronym for Gdudei Chutz La'aretz, the the troops from abroad, namely the new immigrants. This is not to be confused with the Machal, which is the volunteers from abroad, like maybe some people from your families. These are the recruits from abroad, namely the survivors. And okay, off from the rocking boat deck, he disembarks to the port quay. On the quay of the homeland was waiting in the shape image. You can see that this is my translation with a few helpers struggling to keep the meaning correct. In the shape of a military truck and a sergeant. She stamped, she, the homeland, in Hebrew it's feminine. She stamped his name. She threw his cloth into a bag, and she made him take a terrible oath to the sound of a trickling rain. That's the oath of commitment to the young IDF. This is 48, 5 months into the state. We saw him crawling or kneeling or standing in line with a plate in his hand, and he knew without brother or friend, it is hard to fight the freedom war. This land did not yet give him neither friend nor a safe haven, not even some joy of the thousands we all received as a gift. No, just his life, which escaped the sword, was handed to him on the coast, but this very life by evening, he handed back while falling for her. And the translation helped myself and Michael Bonin from Boston, who is one of the many participants in my other poetry classes. Two things that need to be noted. Yes, we brought them in, but we recruited them immediately into the War of Independence. And many of them did not even have a chance to enjoy the new land, those 1,000 blessings that we who were born here, who lived here before the Holocaust were enjoying. And you know how limited the means of the Jews living in the land of Israel prior to the state were, and yet, what a blessing in comparison to the Holocaust. And I highlighted in the Hebrew, the lanu, to us, those 1,000 blessings, but we gave him his life upon arrival. We took it back at night as he fell for the country. On the right-hand side, you see a monument that is created for those recruits, soldiers, Holocaust survivors who were the last one of their families, and therefore nobody to remember them, nobody to say Kaddish for them. So now there is an NGO that deals with that. So Alterman, as early as 48, we are still in the high, of fighting the war of independence. And Alterman is out there to say, yes, but. And I want you to be able to see these two sides. And then we will take another step, because I don't like to make your life too easy. We are looking, the English is coming in a moment. We are looking at an excerpt from a book published in 1957. So this would be like, the state is already 9 years old. It is called Dove City. About 3 or 4 poems out of it were ever translated into English. The first chapter deals with the clandestine immigration prior to the state, then with the War of Independence, and then the last part of Dove City, Ir Hayuna, deal with the early years of the state. And we are reading from one of the early pages dealing with the clandestine immigration. And researchers of Alterman will tell you that these lines, these poems, albeit published in 1957, were written in the 40s. While he was writing the response to the Italian captain, the ballad-like tone, the toasting tone, the celebratory tone, somewhere in another corner of his life, he is writing other impressions of the same. And he's talking about the encounter between the old-timer Israeli fighting Palmachniks, etc., and those miserable survivors arriving. I'm not teaching you Dove City today. I'm teaching you Alterman and the clandestine immigration. And I translated today just this verse. Let me read the Hebrew first. לא האיבה בינינו לבינם, אבל לא לשווא, בליל ההורדה, בהיות כוכב רואינו, את כי עומסים אנו את הבאים בחשיכה, את כי נושאים אנו את חייתם על גב, חשים אנחנו את חרדת נשימתם, ואת ענקת גופם הדח והניגף, אך גם את כפתם נסגרת על גרוננו. There is no hatred between us and them. Yet it is not in vain that during the nights of downloading, when only the stars can see us, when we shoulder the ones surviving in the darkness, when we carry their lives on our backs, we feel the fright of their breath, the pain of their bodies beaten and slight, but also their hand closing on our throat. The two-sided, more complete, if you wish, Alterman has an ability and an honesty very rare at the time, which he will dare publish only a decade later. They scared us. They were frightening. They were choking us, all these survivors. It's not that we hate them, but they're so difficult to embrace. So here is an honesty really unparalleled by many writers of the period, of Alterman, who knows how to toast, who knows how to glorify, but who also knows to be honest, to keep his words for a decade, and then to discuss them in the open in Dove City about the hardships of the early years of Israel, about the difficulty of the meeting between the survivors and the natives, the Sabras, the born here in the country, that had lingered for many, many, many years in Israeli society. And only now, when second generation like myself are already in their 8th decade, we have come to a really open conversation of these issues. Alterman was there as early as the 40s. As he was writing that beautiful poem we have started with, in another part of his life, he was collecting his impressions. So when you see him taking notes, I'm not sure what lines he had written there as he watched what is happening and what he wrote later in his rooms. I'll keep this for a couple of your comments, not before I go to the next slide, to tell you that next week we will be meeting an extremely important poem called The Silver Platter, and this will be our second discussion of the second poem out of the 4 we are planning to do here. I intentionally left a few minutes for your comments and questions. Would you like to lead into it, Rabbi?
Yeah, so I have 2 things. One, I'm wondering, I don't know that much about Alterman's personality, and I don't know if you spoke about it as our internet was going down. He seems an incredible empath, that he is able to like so articulate some of these emotions. So personality wise, what was he like? And the other thing I just want to show you is we've come full circle. So when I brought Avner Avraham to your class, your Israel class, he talked about this Eichmann stamp, the 2 million with the 6 million on it. And it just arrived yesterday. It took a year. I ordered it that day and it took almost a year to arrive. So just that, that tie of the Holocaust in Israel, that the Holocaust is always, the stamp is in 1961 at the Eichmann trial. And yet it talks about the 6 million prosecutors from the Holocaust. It's like that, it's inextricably linked. And I don't know if you want to address like how in 2021, go ahead.
What I can do in the 5 minutes left to us.
Okay.
So here is what I can do. I cannot give you a full biography of Alterman. I gave you a little bit. He is a man of contrasts. And the time when the big Ben Gurion voice leads toward melting pot, everything Zionist, everything Hebrew, Alterman still writes in Yiddish as well. Alterman connects to the world of Jews outside of Israel. During the Eichmann trial, following the way Israel opted to commemorate the Holocaust, mainly through the heroism of the ghetto fighters, he is a single voice against that, criticizing the focus on the few who had fought physically and calling upon us as early as the 50s to look at the larger picture. I don't think he was a very pleasant person personally. He was known for drinking and for having a drinking problem. He led his life with 2 different women at the same time. They each knew about each other. So a very complex personality. So when asked about that, I would say I wouldn't want Alterman to be neither my spouse nor my father, but his poetry, I'm so glad that is part of my life. So I hope this helps a little bit. And maybe we can take a few more.
Any other questions? I'm glad we have time. If any, we were trying to take them in the chat.
So this is why
of time. If there's anyone else.
Comments, questions? Yes.
Rabbi Moss.
Yeah. Please unmute. Yeah.
Shalom. Yes, thank you. Shalom. This is very wonderful. That last line that you translated about clutching the throats is just so dramatic, so brutal, so powerful. And as you said, this was printed years later on after he had written it. Right after,
57. Right. Yeah.
Your sense of his personality, do you think that his attitude would have changed over the years to those coming into Israel and not only like the Holocaust survivors, but others as well, who many people do view like dragging down the economy and dragging down the people?
Beautiful poetry of that in a book, the latest of his lyrical poets, none of which is translated into English, called Chagigat Kaitz, a beautiful sort of musical-like piece that indeed tells the story of immigrants from Muslim countries and their encounter with the land, and critical that way. And I teach many of that, not in what Jessica and I have chosen for your 4 meetings, but if you are interested, Rabbi Moss, I can maybe show you where to find earlier lectures of mine about other poems by Alterman. And you want a one called Danino's Race that I spoke about many times. And this is, and I can just send you the text, even you don't need the lecture. Email me at korazim@gmail.com, just my last name.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
Goes there, and I will send you the text. You will enjoy it, and you will get a full answer to your question.
Thank you. Toda Rabba.
And you can watch the old lectures. There's I actually had to prepare for a Bialik thing, so I watched your Bialik lecture a couple of times. I cannot accentuate how beautiful the Silver Platter is, how conceptually, to I think our American brains, it's so foreign to even to get through the metaphor itself, you could spend hours. And so I really hope
And
that
we
you
will
are able
spend
to
an
join
hour.
us.
Yeah.
What's that?
We will spend an hour next
Yeah.
week.
Yeah. Just even you start at the metaphor, it makes you sick just thinking about what he's even saying. It's so guttural. I want to thank Kira, our producer. I asked her to be producer because as an Israeli, I wanted her to hear Rachel. I want to thank all of you who joined us in the Zoom and in our other platforms. Rachel, I can't thank you enough. There is an Israeli poetry regular lecture that she runs. She is an Ivrit Kal group coming up. I was going to ask if it's Rabbi's Ivrit Kal or like beginner Hebrew Ivrit Kal.
Anybody can join the Ivrit
Okay.
Kala. It will start on, actually, I'm debating because I just learned that it was Memorial Day, so I may switch the opening day. It was planned for May 31st, and some people find that it's not such a great idea.
Yeah.
So I'm still working on that. I'm teaching poetry classes every Tuesday, every Thursday. One is starting in exactly 1 hour. That's my regular class, and we are doing Hanoch Levin today. My regular classes have live music as well, and you are more than welcome. I think, Rabbi, that you get the weekly information.
I do. So anyone can be in touch with me.
Directly on my email list. All you have to do is email me at korazim@gmail.com. I'll put you on my mailing list, and then once a week, no more. I'm not nudging, just one email a week with all the information. Thank you for being here, and everybody else on all those other venues. I see some of my regulars as well here, which is always great to see. And so if you are indeed one of those or would like to be one of those, I will see you in an hour in our Hanoch Levin class. Thank you very much, Jessica, for making this happen.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Thank you,
Ed.
everyone. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.